Hello, I'm Sarah from Wow English and I'm here today with another video lesson all about how to write interviews for First Language English IGCSE Paper 1 Question 3. Let's get straight to it. All of the resources that you'll need today are on wowenglish.co.uk. If you're following along on YouTube, then you can just find a link down in the description to this. Or if you're following along on one of my free online courses, then the materials are just over in the sidebar where it says lesson materials. The worksheet looks like this and it's designed to help you follow along today's lesson, so please make sure that you do download it. I think it's very useful. As I've said then, we're doing all about interview writing for question 3. Question 3 is the longest question on your paper 1 reading exam, and you could be asked to write any of these 6 text types. If you've been following along by now, you'll have heard me say this many times, so I shan't repeat myself, but we are doing interview writing today. Quickly then, a question to get your brains working. What do you guess that the purpose of a radio interview might be? Do you think a radio interview might be to inform, persuade, entertain, or argue? So the correct answer is inform or entertain. It depends, right? But usually people listen to the radio for 2 reasons. Maybe whichever reason you listen to the radio, if you do listen to the radio, could give you a clue about your personality. We listen to the radio to be informed, to find out information. Maybe you listen to the news in the morning. Or we listen to the radio to kill some time, to be entertained. And sometimes it's a mixture of the 2 together. It's not often that you would listen to the radio to be persuaded or be persuaded via the radio. And it's not often that you would listen to a radio interview where they're arguing. A radio debate, yeah, sure. An election campaign, yeah, sure. But a radio interview, not so much. Usually to be informed or entertained. So then, what is the path, the purpose, audience, format and tone of the text that we're going to be writing today? So the purpose, question, why are you being interviewed and who is interviewing you? That is going to give you a clue as to whether you're being interviewed to inform or to entertain. What's the format? Interview, and very, very often in CIE the format will be a radio interview. That's really, really common that I've seen. Also TV interview I have seen as well. Who's the audience? So who would be listening to the radio show and who would actually be interviewing you? You've got 2 audiences there, right? You've got the actual audience, the crowd of people or the listeners of the radio show, and also the audience of the actual interviewer, the talk show host, right? The host of the interview, the person who's asking you the questions. So there are 2 audiences there. And then the tone, I say this all the time, you're probably bored of me saying it by now, but the tone, how formal or informal your character should be, is defined by the text. What is the character like in the text? Does the character seem like a very formal, academic person, or do they seem a little bit more casual, a little bit more semi-formal, more likely to use idioms, more likely to use slang, more likely to be excitable and therefore use exclamation marks? Again, it's very dependent text by text. I can't tell you that a radio interview will always have a certain tone because it changes. What do you already know then about interview writing? Pause the screen and have a think. Have you ever read an interview? Have you ever written an interview? Have you ever been interviewed? Have you listened to some interviews? Who have you heard being interviewed and why? Pause the screen and have a think about what you already know. What is your foundation of knowledge for today's lesson? Okay, and here's the bit where I try to guess through my screen what the common answers might be to a question like this. So what do you already know about interview writing? Maybe some of you might think it needs to be like a script, and you will be correct, and we'll talk more about that later. Maybe you might say it's often celebrities or important people like politicians or business people, business people who are interviewed, right? Maybe you can say that very often it's radio or TV or YouTube, something like that. That interviews, often they've got several different audiences, right? So you might have a live audience and then you might have the audience at home who are listening or watching to the interview. So not just one audience. As we've said before, often to inform or entertain, and that will depend on the person. if you were listening to a politician like Boris Johnson give an interview, then that might be a little bit more to inform, a little bit more factual, versus if you were listening to Kanye West give an interview, or Kim Kardashian, or some like celebrity like that, it might be a little bit more entertaining and a little bit more casual. So it can be very casual. I wonder if any of you got this point, and it seems like an obvious point, but perhaps so obvious that maybe you haven't written it down. They are spoken, right? You give an interview and you are interviewed face to face, or I guess these days Zoom to Zoom, but you're speaking, you're using your voice, right? So it should have features of spoken language. It should sound like you are speaking. And also that an interview will have an interviewer and an interviewee. So you've got one person that asks the questions and one person that answers the questions. Again, might seem like a very obvious point, but it's important to think about that, right? It is a dialogue, it's a conversation happening between two people, but they each have very different purposes. One is to ask the questions and one is to answer the questions. Now I've got some recommended further viewing for you, and I do recommend that you go away and watch these before you do the rest of today's video lesson, to give you a little bit of inspiration and just to remind you, what does an interview actually sound like, what does it look like, what kinds of questions might be asked, how might people respond to them. So there are 3 different options here and they're all quite different. The links to them are all available on the worksheet and just down below in this video, and they're all on YouTube. If you are in a country that doesn't allow YouTube or you can't access YouTube, then they're very, very common interviews. I'm pretty sure that if you just go on a different video streaming website like Yoku or Bilibili, or even just search on Bing, that these interviews will come up. And of course, if you're not interested in these interviews, then you could go away and just watch an interview with a celebrity of your choice, someone that you really like or idolise. That will be fine too if you want to go away and pick your own. So the 3 choices that I've got are an interview with Trevor Noah with Eyewitness News. Trevor Noah, in case you don't know, is a very famous comedian, TV talk show host and an author. He's got a really, really good book called Born a Crime, an autobiography of his childhood growing up during the South African apartheid. Highly recommended. An interview with Nadia Hussain, who is the winner of the Great British Bake Off some years ago. And News Round, in case you don't know, is a children's TV news show. So it would be interesting to compare Nadia's interview with Trevor's interview, because they're both news interviews, but one is meant for adults and one is meant for children. So you could have a think about how the tone and formality changes there. And then finally, you've got an Ellen interview with Kim Kardashian. And Ellen is not a news show, it's an entertainment show, a talk show, and she is a comedian. She also used to be an actress in sitcoms. So again, that's a very significant tone change. And also Kim Kardashian is probably one of the least serious interviewees out of the 3. So it would be really interesting. I personally think it's really interesting. You should go away and watch all 3. Maybe you don't agree and don't think it's quite so interesting, but I do think it's good practice. And as I've said, if you find all of these not interesting or you can't find the interviews, feel free to go away and find one of your own. That's okay, that's fine. So there's a space in your worksheet for you to do this. You're going to watch one of these interviews and fill in the worksheet. If you watch all 3, have a go at ranking the interviews from least formal to most formal. And then also pick one of the interviews and answer the questions. So what is the PAFT, the purpose, audience, format and tone of the interviews? Write down any features of interviews that you notice, like common ways that they handle the conversation or words or phrases that they often use. What type of language does the interviewee often use? And what is the relationship between the interviewer and the interviewee? They're having a conversation, they're having a dialogue. What's their relationship? Do they seem to get along? Have they got some banter? Have they got a bond? Do they dislike each other? Is it formal? Is it semi-formal? Is it really, really informal? So have a think about all of those questions and fill in your worksheet now. Pause the screen, go away and do the task, and then come back. Let's talk in a little bit more depth about the interview's path, thinking about especially what comes up on CIE exams. So beginning with purpose, what is an interview's purpose? Well, an interview's purpose will depend on the text, it will depend on the person, it will depend on the context. But it's often to inform and often to entertain. Usually in CIE, more often to inform than to entertain. And that's because it is ultimately a reading question in that paper one. So they're wanting you to pick out a lot of details from a certain text, and therefore the purpose to entertain isn't so common for CIE. In the real world, the purpose of interviews is usually to entertain, but in CIE's world, which we're all inhabiting right now, it is to inform. Apologies if you can hear a little bit of background noise. It is a public holiday right now in China, and I think my next door neighbours are having a bit of a party. So you can just think of that as ambient background noise if you can hear that. Some examples of interviews that I've taken from CIE past papers might be a radio interview with a grandfather who's going on a trip with his granddaughter. That was one that came up. A TV interview with a jungle guide about her unusual job, and a radio interview with a local mayor about local issues. These are all taken from past papers, so you can see the range here that CIE has got for you. The audience of a radio interview, read the question carefully. It always changes. If it's a radio show, for example, talking about history, then the audience is probably going to be a bit older, more serious, more intelligent, more academic, and that will give you a more formal tone. But if it's a TV interview about an unusual job, like the Jungle Guide one, then the audience is probably going to be more so looking to be entertained. And so the tone could be a little bit more fun and a little bit less serious. So it can change. Read the question very carefully. An interview's format, you should lay out an interview like a script. We're going to look at this in more detail later on, so don't panic if it's completely new. But the basic thing you need to know is you'll say the people's name at the side and put a colon after their name, and then just write down what they say. So you can see here we've got Sarah, colon, and then a little bit of a space. This is a script, laughs. This here is what we call stage directions. And we're still using correct punctuation and grammar, right? So we're ending with a full stop. Stop. So your spag still matters. Is important, as always, because you're getting some writing marks. And then the next person again, their name, colon. And for CIE, if it doesn't tell you the person's name, you can just make it up. It's fine just to call the interviewer exactly that. Interviewer, colon, or maybe host or presenter. That's absolutely fine. And then the character, if it doesn't give you the character's name, like there's one, the one that we spoke about slightly earlier, about the grandfather going on a walk with the granddaughter. Well, in that text, it never actually gives the grandfather's name. You can make up a name for that person. My granddad is called Terry, so we'll say he's called Terry, no problem. Quick question then. In a radio interview, you should use internet slang like OMG, LOL, smiley face, and you. Is that true or false? Time's up. And it's false. You are being marked for your writing quality. Like I've said, the most informal you should ever be is only ever semi-formal, and it should always be grammatically accurate. Spelling should always be accurate. Punctuation should always be accurate, no matter the task. It's a GCSE, right? The examiner already knows you can use internet slang and emojis, trust me, right? So no need to ever do that. You will never gain marks for doing that. You will only ever lose them. So still write in standard correct English. An interview's tone, well, it depends. Which character have you been asked to write as? What type of personality do they have? Who is the audience of their interview? All of these things will affect the tone. So think about the extract that you've been given and the question very carefully. But most often the tone is formal or semi-formal. As always, I keep saying this, formal or semi-formal, most common for question 3. Here's an example interview, and I'm just hiding my face so that you can see the full screen here. Presenter. Welcome to Talk Radio, and I'm joined by Louis Ung, the founder of Football for Society. Can you please tell our listeners a little more about what inspired you to become an entrepreneur? Louis. Sure. Good to be here, Ted. I guess I've always been into the idea that sport can help in more ways than just improving our individual health. but can also bring together communities and better society as a whole. I mean, well, as a boy, I might have gone down some dangerous paths had I not joined my local football team. Wow, excellent spelling error there, Miss O'Rourke's team. Laughs. Thankfully, I had a wonderful coach that pushed me to be the best I could, physically and mentally. Presenter. He sounds like a great guy. Louis. He really was. He was like a father to me. Not just to me, but to everyone on our team. So there's a copy of this interview on your worksheet and a space for you to write your ideas. What I want you to do now is to answer these questions having a look at this exemplar. What is the tone of the exemplar, the emotion, the atmosphere between the two people, and give some examples? What do you notice about my language choices? What do you notice about my use of punctuation? And what features do I use that have made the interview, the speaking, sound more spoken? How have I made it sound like it's actually really two people having a conversation with each other? Have a little think, pause the screen now, head on over to your worksheet and do this task, then come back to the video lesson. Alright, so let's have a talk about it together then. So firstly, what is the tone of this interview? Well, I would say it's semi-formal, it's friendly, it's casual, it's a mixture, I would say mostly to entertain, also a little bit to inform. Because Louis is telling the listener a little bit about their, it looks like charity, Football for Society. So they're also informing a little bit, but also to entertain. So what do we notice about the language choices then? And how is that achieving these aims? Let me just change on over to a highlighter. So it's a little bit more casual, like we've got words like sure, and we spoke about for the speeches, we've got contractions, I've instead of I have. We've got the fill of words, just like we spoke about for speeches, well, filling in a little gap. We've got the use of exclamation marks and ellipses, perhaps that's answering your punctuation question. And the vocabulary isn't too technical, it's relatively casual, it's relatively accessible. Maybe if we have a closer look, there are some words related to sports, like being a coach, physically, and everything like that. But we have also got some more casual language, like saying teen rather than teenager makes it sound that a little bit more casual, that little bit more semi-formal. On to the punctuation question then, we've already kind of answered that, but we have got question marks because of course an interview is one person asking questions and another person answering. We've got the exclamation marks and we've got the use of ellipses, all of these adding a little bit of tone, right? The exclamation mark makes it sound like the person's excitable and adding a bit of emphasis and they're enthusiastic. The ellipses, the ... that is making it sound like the speaker is having a quick pause, because when we're speaking, sometimes we need to have a think about what we're going to say next. And what features do I use that make it sound a little bit more spoken? Well, the contractions, like we've spoken about, the I've and I'm up here. We've got the fact that Louis is saying the person's name, Ted, so they're talking to the presenter, they're referring to each other. We've got some stage directions, laughs, that definitely makes it feel a little bit more spoken. We've also got some use of collective pronouns like our and personal pronouns you, you. Because when you're doing an interview, it's a dialogue between two people, so you should be saying you should be saying each other's names and making the two parts seem connected to each other. An interview isn't a speech, an interview isn't a monologue, it's a conversation. So all of those things make it sound a little bit more spoken. Over here then to a quick question. Thank you for your question, Ted. This sentence uses what technique? Does it use personal pronouns, collective pronouns, or formal address? And And the correct answer is it uses personal pronouns as seen by the words you and your. Collective pronoun would be we, our, us, and formal address, that isn't a real technique, I made that up. Next, here's another one. Well, I guess you're right. What technique does this sentence use? Does it use ellipses, fillers, or slang? And it uses two techniques. It uses ellipses, which are the ... and it also uses a filler word with the word well. Remember, a filler word is a word that we say while we're filling in the gap, thinking about what to say next. So now I'm going to talk to you about some of the rules of interview writing. Make sure you make some notes about this. Here are some quick tips that you guys can use when you write your interviews to make it sound a little bit more appropriate, a little bit more spoken, and just all around give you that tone that you're looking for with interview writing. So my first piece of advice for you is very Cambridge specific. When you come to write this question for Cambridge on your paper 1, only use the 3 bullet points. And what I mean by that is on the question, it will literally say 3 bullet points, 3 questions that your interviewer will ask. So for CIE, only write down those 3 questions. Don't have your interviewer making up extra questions for that person to ask, because that's going to take you off topic and then you won't get as many reading marks. So for Cambridge, don't ask more questions. And for Cambridge as well, your interviewee should do most of the talking. In today's practices, you're not going to have 3 bullet points, so you don't need to worry about that. But I feel like it's so important that I have to say it now, and I have to let you know, even though we're not quite up to that part yet, because this is a common mistake that my students make when interview writing for CIE. Next is just general interview writing tips. So you should try to use some spoken language. Remember that the format of an interview is 2 people speaking to each other, having a conversation verbally. So don't forget to use some filler words like, well, I guess, I hadn't thought about that before. But don't do this too much or it'll sound weird. I think 2 or 3 times in a whole piece of writing is fine. Anything more than that and it just starts to sound quite artificial, quite fake. So 2 to 3 times max, I think, is enough. Quick question. I said it a lot this video, hope you were listening. What do we call this punctuation mark? Do we call it ... triple period, or ellipses? And I hope that you got this one right. The answer was ellipses. My students will swear down that you call it ... You don't, it's called ellipses. So punctuation. For speech writing, you need to think about your use of punctuation to make your writing sound more spoken, to try to create a tone that you can imagine how someone would say it out loud. So you can use ellipses, ... for a pause. You can use a dash to show that the speaker has changed the direction of their sentence. Let me write a quick example of that. I went to the shops yesterday and ... No, that's not right. ... Was it the day before? And here the dash is used to show the person has stopped the sentence that they were saying and that they're now changing it and adding on a different point. So you can use the dash to do that. And again, I think the key with all of these tips is do them 1 or 2 times. If you do it any more than that, it will start to just seem boring and strange. But I think that's a good tip. You can also use exclamation marks to place emphasis or show excitement. Again, don't do it too much. Set it down here at the bottom of my slide. Don't do it too much or it'll sound weird. But I think a mixture of these mixed in throughout your interview will be good. You can also use personal pronouns, you, yours. Have your interviewee speak to the interviewer directly, because they can say things like, you really can't imagine blah blah blah, or don't look so surprised. So actually have them interacting with each other a little bit, or I don't know, anything where the interviewee is saying like, oh, you can't imagine how awful this situation was. You seem surprised at what I just said. Why are you laughing at me? Like anything like that, that little bit of banter between the interviewer and the interviewee, using you or talking about each other's reactions. I think that makes it seem a little bit more genuine, a little bit more like a real conversation between two people. And then you should lay out your interview like a script, use a script format. So here's an example on the screen. Andy, so Kayla, tell me, why do you love English so much? Kayla, well, because of Miss O'Rourke, of course. So here we've got the person's names, we've got the colon, a little bit of a space, and look here, they're using the other person's name, they've got a filler word as well, another filler word down here, exclamation mark. All of these things make it sound a lot more spoken. And you can also use stage directions in brackets too, like laughs, nods, claps. Again, don't do it too much or it'll sound weird. You can give the presenter a name, or indeed you can give the interviewee a name. Fine to make up names for the people that are in the interview. And also a good idea to then use those names throughout the interview. So later on, maybe Andy would say to Kayla, oh, me and you have been we've known each other for a long time, haven't we, Kayla? Just use that person's name within the body of the interview. Here's an example then. Interviewer, tell me about your experiences on that day. Rachel, sure, Jim. So the day started out like any other, ... a disaster. Ha ha ha. So here we've got Rachel using the interviewer's name. And again, it creates that relationship between the two people. That's key to this, really. A good interview makes it seem like you have really got two people talking to each other. So all of these techniques aim to try and create that tone of two people in conversation. Quick question. Which of the following techniques should you not do when writing interviews? Give stage directions, add extra questions, or use filler words. And the correct answer was add extra questions. So for CIE, they will give you 3 questions and you just copy down those questions. Do not add in your extra questions yourself. Only ask the questions that CIE give you. So my tips for speech writing before I send you away to have a go at doing these, let me just get rid of my face. Think about the pronouns that you are using. You should use the pronoun you to speak to the interviewer and try and make it seem like they are in conversation with each other. Use a script format that looks like this: name, colon, space, and then the sentence. Use spoken language like filler words such as well, huh, I hadn't thought about that before. Use punctuation to make it sound a little bit more spoken. Use an ellipses to show a pause. Use a question mark to show that someone's asking a question. Use an exclamation mark to show excitement or place emphasis on a particular sentence. And you can also use a dash to show that someone has changed their train of thought. Give your interviewer and your interviewee names. Even if CIE doesn't specify the names, you can make up a first or second name for either of these people. And for CIE particularly, use the 3 bullet points only. Don't make up extra questions on the exam. Only ask the questions that the exam paper gives you. So here are our practice tasks, and you've got a choice of 2. So one is a real interview. Go away and interview a family member or friend about something interesting that happened to them. You could even record the interview and then try to write it down. So actually go away and interview someone in your real life so you can see what type of language you're using and they're using, and it should happen quite naturally. After you've done this, write down the script and try to keep in some of the spoken language features that you heard. Or if you don't have someone willing to help you with that, you can imagine that you are interviewing a celebrity of your choice. Firstly, go online and find an interview with your chosen celebrity and make notes as you listen. How does that celebrity speak? After this, write an interview with the same celebrity about a new topic. So your interview shouldn't be what you've heard, it should be something new that you're making up. Try to make your interview language sound really similar to the celebrity's language that you heard in your research. There's a space for you to do this on your worksheet. Go away and do that now, and then after you've done that, come back to this video and we'll do a quick bit of self-marking. So I hope that your interview writing went well. Now we're going to mark our own work. Get your pens ready. Firstly, I want you to put a tick next to any spoken phrases, like heart, well, I hadn't thought about it, any of those filler phrases, or the word you. Put a star next to names. Did you create a name for your interviewer, for your interviewee? Did you repeat it throughout the interview? Highlight good vocabulary that you used, any sophisticated or impressive words that you used. Underline any words or phrases that actually sound like your character, any slang that they might use, any particular phrases that you think really sound like the person that you interviewed. Circle your favourite sentence and explain why that was your favourite sentence. And just double check, did you use script format? Does it look like this? Did you remember to use stage directions? Just double check that for me. Thank you so much for doing my video lesson today. I do hope it was useful. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and to head over to my website wowenglish.co.uk for more free resources and lessons. Until next time, goodbye.